Hey everyone. So I have been fielding a lot of questions from athletes recently asking about pre-training fueling. So it inspired me that I wanted to put out a sequence and discuss just timing of fueling because it's so important as athletes that we're really thinking about when we're fueling and what we're fueling with based on in relation to our training time, in relation to our next training sequence, and then also in relation to that recovery eating window as well. So, the first video is going to be all about pre training. I'm going to provide 3 simple tips and words of wisdom around pre training fueling. And then the next video I release is going to be talking about intra training or intra match fueling and what's important there. The third video is going to talk about recovery nutrition and some simple tips and tricks in relation to that. So let's get started. Let's talk about kind of some 3 simple tips and tricks that I talk with athletes about all the time because I hear a lot of times, most recently, what I've been hearing is that, Bethany, I'm just feeling gassed partway through my workout. I'm not feeling like I have full energy to reach my full potential all the way to the end of my workout or my training session. And this is where I always come back to that pre-training fueling. It's not just what we're doing immediately before, but this is oftentimes an easy adjustment that can go a long ways in terms of how you feel during that training session. So first thing is with pre-training is thinking about that and planning ahead of what that window is looking like before your training. So depending on if you have a morning training or an afternoon training, start thinking about where is pre-training nutrition happening. So that pre-planning piece is really important. And when we're thinking about that, we want to make sure that we're getting a balanced meal about 3 to 4 hours before that training session. And typically, and this is kind of dependent on your gut tolerance and what feels best for you, but usually that balanced meal is about 3 to 4 hours ahead. It's going to include all of our macronutrients, right? Protein, carbohydrate, fat. We're going to have some color with fruits and veggies. Once we start hitting around 2 hours before we're training, this is where we want to focus more on adding in a balanced snack. Typically, that 2 hour window, I say add in something that has a good source of carbohydrate because we know that's our primary source of fuel when we're especially high intensity exercise. So making sure that we're topping off and adding in some carbohydrate and then adding in a little bit of protein. Remember, protein's going to kind of slow down that digestion and absorption. And so adding in protein is going to help us feel more satiated and more satisfied when we're at that kind of like 2 hour window before a training session. Once we've hit like within an hour of training, we only have an hour before we're hitting the field, before we're hitting the gym. That's where we want to focus primarily on carbohydrates. So we want to be mindful about not including too much fiber and this is really based on your gut tolerance. Some people notice that if it's more fiber rich carbs, it just doesn't go so well. And the reasoning behind that is that as we're exercising, blood shunts away from the gut. And so it's not focused on digesting and absorbing at that point. And so if we have food left in the gut at that point, it can be kind of uncomfortable and cause that gut GI upset. So simple carbohydrates, things like fruit, applesauce packets, fruit leathers. It could be dried or fresh fruit. Remember that dried fruit is going to have a good amount of carbohydrate or a good amount of fiber depending on how much we're eating. So you're taking out all that liquid out of the fruit and it's more concentrated. So just being really mindful of that. You can get a heck of a lot of fiber in dried fruit if you're eating a lot of it at one time. So just be mindful there. It could be an English muffin. It could be toast with some jam on it. Those are going to be more easy digested, absorbed sources of carbohydrate. And sometimes it's even like having a Gatorade or having some energy chews, something like that, depending on what's available. But this is where that planning piece comes in. So that is tip number 1, is thinking about the timing. What window are we in relation to starting training? And then deciding what would be best in terms of that nutrient content. Tip number 2 is the energy piece, right? If you are feeling gas during your training, if you're feeling fatigued, that's a really good sign that there's probably a fueling component incorporated there. And so we never want to enter into a training session without proper fueling because we're not going to get as much out of it. So this is where the energy piece is super important. We need to make sure we're not going to start a road trip and not gas our car. We want to make sure that we gas our car, we're starting that road trip on a full tank, we're ready to rock and roll. Same thing with fueling. So don't skip that pre-training snack, especially if it's been a long window before you have eaten. A good example is you get up and you have a morning training. So often athletes are like, Bethany, I don't want to eat this early. However, you've been fasting all night long. You're waking up in the morning and you're challenging your body to jump out of bed and have the energy to get the most out of that workout. So even if it's a short window of time, if you wake up and you're working out within an hour, get in some sort of easy carb snack. It could be a banana, that would be fantastic, a fig bar, something like that that's going to allow you to get the most out of your workout and fuel that workout. So that's tip 2. Tip 3 is training that gut tolerance. So I've been talking a little bit about protein, a little bit about fiber, how that can impact how we're absorbing, as well as if there's kind of some GI upset. That's a really common one, especially for endurance athletes. They notice that if they're incorporating fuel ahead of time, they feel kind of heavy. They feel like there's stuff kind of sitting in their gut and it's just really uncomfortable. And this is oftentimes the reason that I'll get why athletes say, I don't want to eat breakfast because I just don't feel well in training. So I always tell athletes, you can train your gut. You can move in that direction and slowly build up. We want to build up over time and allow that gut to adapt and respond. But it is possible. So I want to plant that seed. It takes a little bit of time to kind of build up. So my advice is always start small with something familiar that you feel comfortable with heading into that training session. So an easy one that a lot of athletes will tolerate is like applesauce, or like one of those little squeeze applesauce packets are fantastic. I use those a ton because they can go in your gym bag. They're transportable, super simple, something that you can have on hand. Maybe it's part of a fig bar or just a slice of toast, like I said, with a little bit of jelly, something like that. Just something really light and simple, and slowly building into it and see how your body tolerates. But chances are you're going to feel a heck of a lot more energized as long as we're sticking to primarily carbohydrates and especially being mindful about fiber. So keep in mind doing like a white bread or white rice or something that's not quite so fiber rich can be really helpful for pre-training fueling if you struggle with gut upset. So that's where the fiber piece, usually I would recommend, we want all the fiber. It's fantastic for our gut, but in that particular eating window, this is where some of those simple, more refined carbohydrates can be really, really helpful. All right. So thinking about that gut tolerance piece, so I talked about the fiber, the protein piece also, protein, fat, and fiber all can kind of slow down that digestion and absorption. So we're really just looking for easy digesting, quick sources of carbohydrate when we have that short window before training. All right, so those are my 3 tips just to kind of get you started. So if you want to learn more about the work that I do with athletes, learn more about this fueling piece, I have an awesome resource available on my website. It's the Mind Body Nutrition Guide. I've broken down 4 common mind body nutrition dimensions that I work on consistently with athletes. And this kind of gives you a little bit more insight into some other topics and areas, including this timing pieces in there, and thinking about how to really optimize your performance while also building a healthy relationship with food and body. And so if you want to learn more there, also stay tuned. I'm going to be doing another video about intra fueling during training, as well as recovery nutrition. So stay tuned for the remainder of the sequence, and definitely don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. I'd love for you to pop in, send me an email, shoot me a message on Instagram, or even leave a note in the YouTube comments. I'd love to connect and hear a little bit more about your journey. All right. Thank you.